Welcome to Human Monsters. Part 1. Alexander the Viatka maniac Komin. Komin was remembered as a svelte man with captivating blue eyes who worked primarily as an electrician, but supplemented his income by selling women's garments and oven mitts at a local market. In Viatsky, Polini, the small town he lived in, he was described by locals as friendly and courteous. That was the facade he projected to the outside world. What the local people were unaware of was the bunker he built 40 feet under his garage, which measured at 100 square feet. It was used as a prison of sorts, housing 5 women and a man. All of them served him as slave laborers. The women were subordinate to him as sex slaves. It is unknown when he was inspired to build the bunker, but it is known that the first victim, Vera Tolpayeva, was lured there in summer 1995. He invited her to his house for a night of partying and drinking. She imbibed so much vodka, she passed out. When she woke, she was shackled to a space with dirt walls. She began to scream. As she did, a trapdoor sprung open, and Komin began descending down a wooden ladder. She begged him to let her go, but in a congenial voice, he explained that she had become his slave and that it meant she would be indentured into servitude, completing manual tasks. She would also be required to accommodate his sexual demands. He took her on a tour of the bunker. There were 2 small rooms. One had 3 bunks and a television. The other room was outfitted with 3 sewing machines. She would be put to work sewing garments for him to sell. Initially, Vera assumed he was playing a cruel but practical joke on her. After a moment, she realized he was deadly serious. As an attempt to extricate herself from the situation, she offered to provide him with 2 alternate workers, Tatiana Melnikova and her boyfriend Nikolai Malik. She told him they were both experienced and highly skilled tailors, while she was lacking in that area. Komin took this into consideration for a moment and then agreed. There was a caveat, however. If she were to go out and return with those 2 people, he would free her. If she were to run away or inform the police on him, he had accomplices that would hunt her down and kill her. Vera left and returned sometime that day with Tatiana Melnikova and Nikolai Malik. She lured them to the site by promising that Komin had tailoring work for them. Komin didn't hold up his end of the bargain. At gunpoint, he herded Vera, Tatiana, and Nikolai into the bunker. He shackled them all. As time passed, Vera, Tatiana, and Nikolai went to work in Komin's sweatshop, making house coats and aprons for him to sell at the market. Doing unpaid slave labor was not the worst of it for Vera and Tatiana. They were also raped and sodomized. July 1995. Komin added another female to his workforce. Like with Vera, he invited Tatiana Kozikova to his place for a few drinks. She woke up a prisoner. Kumin realized the bunker was overcrowded at this point, so he poisoned Nikolai Malik. His body was left in a field. The police determined that he drank moonshine vodka to excess. Such occurrences were not unheard of in rural Russia in those days. Soon after Nikolai's death, Vera began to resist Kumin's sexual advances and also refused to work. Her fellow prisoners were too afraid of Kumin to back her up. With the agenda of making an example of Vera, he gave her the options of either drinking antifreeze or having it injected into her veins. She chose to drink it, and this led to a very protracted and painful death. Her female co-workers looked on in horror. Vera was replaced by 28-year-old Tatiana Nazimova in 1996. Kumin met her in a train station. Her output in the sweatshop was not sufficient for Kumin, as she was suffering from leukemia, which sapped her of any stamina she might have had. She was killed using the antifreeze method. Kumin wanted to expand his workforce to 6 women. The problem was, the bunker was too small. He hired a man named Evgeny Shishov to assist him with the renovations. Evgeny agreed to a vow of silence and was paid in cash and sexual favors from the women. Kumin wasn't entirely sure he could trust Evgeny, so he replaced the wooden ladder with a steel one, and he connected an electricity feed to it. When Yevgeny stood on the bottom rung, Kumin electrocuted him to death. He left his body in a field. Now, 2 Tatyanas remained in the bunker. When Kumin turned on the light in the morning, it was a signal to them to fasten metal harnesses around their necks, lock them, and leave the key where it was easily accessible to him. They had quotas to fulfill when making the housecoats and oven mitts. At night, they were required to offer themselves up to him sexually. If ever they broke the rules, they would be beaten, starved, and threatened with the antifreeze treatment. When he left the bunker at night, he would attach electricity to the ladder on the way out. All they were fed was dry bread and potatoes. If they complained about the food, he would threaten to butcher Tatiana Nazimova's body and feed it to them. December 1996, 23-year-old Ireina Gadamashuk became the latest resident of the bunker. She wasn't there long before Kumin brought a tattooing machine down to the bunker and inked the word slave onto each woman's forehead. Throughout the subsequent 3 months, Ireina became Kumin's favorite. He beat her the least and enjoyed sex most often with her. He even fed her better food. On March 1st, 1997, he told her he was in love with her and wanted her to marry him. It occurred to Ireina that marrying him would be her only means of escape, so she accepted his proposal and told him she was in love with him. That very night, she was brought up to Kumin's apartment to live with him. The next day, she ran off and informed on him to the police. Komin expressed no remorse for his crimes and even saw himself as the best thing that could have happened to those women. Indeed, he was quoted as saying, "These were unemployed, homeless women. I gave them a place to live and a steady job." Komin was sentenced to 25 years to life. Alexander Komin hung himself in his cell on June 15th, 1999. Part 2. Sergey the Hippopotamus Ryakovsky. Sergey Vasilyevich Ryakovsky was an imposing figure. He stood 6'6" tall and weighed 280 pounds. He was referred to as the hippopotamus because of his large and broadly built stature. He was born in Moscow on December 29, 1962. Little is known about his childhood and early adulthood. It was in 1989 that he first came to the attention of police. They brought him in for questioning regarding the murder of an elderly woman. She was killed via strangulation and was mutilated post-mortem. Sergey had an alibi at the ready. The police didn't bother to investigate its veracity. That would prove to be a critical error on their part, as Sergey killed 19 people over the subsequent 4 years. He would leave their mutilated corpses at different locations throughout Moscow. While most serial killers only murder one type of victim, Sergey wasn't choosy. He killed people of varied ages, genders, and body types. 6 managed to escape from his clutches. He was an opportunistic killer. He strangled, stabbed, or bludgeoned his victims. When it came to strangulation, he did it with a rope or with his bare hands. When it came to bludgeoning, he typically used a claw hammer. He stabbed with long kitchen knives or screwdrivers. Though his victim profiles and methods of murder varied, one thing was consistent: necrophilia. Indeed, he was more sexually attracted to the dead than the living. Once he was assured that his victims were cold, he would rape or sodomize them. He would finish by mutilating the bodies, i.e., disemboweling and amputating their parts. His attacks escalated in brutality with every kill. January 1993. Sergey committed one of his most notable crimes, highlighted because of its morbidity. He stabbed a 78-year-old man with a hunting knife and decapitated him. He brought the head home with him after departing from the scene. This was not enough for him, and he returned to the body the following day to sever a leg. He took the leg with him when he left. The purpose of doing this is unknown. The hippopotamus was always looking to outdo himself when it came to murder. His next victim was a 65-year-old woman. He strangled her to death. As a follow-up, he placed a homemade bomb into her vagina. When it was detonated, the walls of the shed where he killed her were awash with her innards and blood. The only silver lining for her was that she was not alive to suffer the excruciating pain of being blown up. His next victim was not so fortunate. He was a 16-year-old boy, and the hippopotamus hung him from a rafter and tore open his abdomen with a knife, whereupon he ripped out his guts and internal organs, a torture endured by his victim before his death. One day the police were investigating the murder of a man who was left in the wilderness. He was not mutilated, so they were unsure as to whether it was the work of the hippopotamus. However, they did find a shack where he carried out the post-mortem phase of his murders. They carried out a 4-day surveillance, and sure enough, Sergey entered the field and the cabin. When police ordered him to surrender, he dropped to his knees and begged them not to shoot. The hippopotamus was not only cooperative, but he delighted in describing how he committed all the murders. He led the police to the locations where he killed his victims. He said he wanted to purge the world of homosexuals and prostitutes. The investigators pointed out that many of his victims did not fit either criterion. He responded with a shrug. His trial was concluded in July 1995. He was sentenced to death by firing squad. In response, he said simply, "I'll be back." Russia soon placed a moratorium on the death penalty. Sergey died of tuberculosis in 2005. Part 3. Vladimir Margarod. A serial killer was on the loose in summer 2003. Police were struggling to rein the perpetrator in. 10 women were killed, having been strangled and roughed up. The garrots that were used to strangle them were wound so tightly they cut into the victim's flesh. All the autopsies revealed that the victims were raped. One thing the investigators were confused by was that the first few victims were murdered in their homes and the rest in public. Typically, serial killers are consistent. An important method in tracking them down is understanding their paradigms. This perpetrator didn't make that easy. The first 2 murders demonstrated 2 similarities. They were both raped and strangled in 2002. The third victim was a recent arrival from Minsk, who was found indoors hanging from a slip knot. Blood and bruising were visible on her thighs and groin. After raping and killing her, he stole several of her valuables. In March that year, a 20-year-old student was raped and strangled with her own scarf. A few days later, another young woman was killed in an identical manner. A 34-year-old woman from Novosibirsk was found dead in her apartment. In June, a double homicide was discovered. A 43-year-old woman was strangled and raped. Her 16-year-old son was hung from a rafter by a leather belt. Speculation had it that he walked in while his mother was being tortured and was killed to prevent witness testimony. A 28-year-old woman was discovered gagged and strangled at the Botanical Gardens. 28-year-old Ireina Gadamashuk was found after having been strangled with a leather belt. Both of the preceding women were sexually assaulted. Many women managed to escape from his grip as they were strangled and ran to the police. As they described him, they mentioned what they referred to as an, quote, insane, glassy stare. Experts on serial killers have noted that they often go through, quote, cooling off periods when they stop killing. The length of the period depends on the individual, but this killer did not murder for several months. The police, who were unable to catch him, were at least fortunate that the nightmare was over. Whether that situation would remain indefinitely, only time would tell. It didn't help that Russian law enforcement was behind that of the West, where DNA evidence often factors into investigations. It turned out that the cooling off period was not undergone voluntarily. Margarod was arrested for robbery and was imprisoned during the time when the murders ceased. They tracked him down and he was rearrested. He confessed to 7 murders, though forensic analysis linked him to 17 homicides. Due to the murders, rapes, and assaults, he was sentenced to life in prison. Part 4. Ireina, Satan in a Skirt, Gadamashuk. Maybe you've been sitting there thinking, where are the females in this list? Wait no further, for I have a female murderer who ranks among Russia's most violent criminals. Ireina Gadamashuk was born in Nyagan, Russia in 1972. Her parents were alcoholics, and their inattention frequently led to neglect, with Ireina being inadequately fed, and she was not dressed suitably for the harsh Russian winters. Having lived this life for far too long, Ireina was removed from their custody and became a ward of the state. The influence of her parents lingered, unfortunately. When they passed out from drinking, Ireina would sample from their bottles out of curiosity. Soon she was hooked. Before the onset of adolescence, she was already an alcoholic. She never beat her addiction, and it led to a downward spiral that would last for the rest of her life. Ireina was released from state care when she was 18 years old. It was the early 1990s, and she moved to the town of Krasnoyarsk in the Sverdlovsk Oblast. There she met and married a man named Yuri. They had 2 children together. The children did not grow up in a harmonious household. Ireina's drinking got progressively worse, and it was a major point of contention between her and Yuri. For example, when Yuri gave her money for the upkeep of the house and other domestic responsibilities, she would just spend it on vodka. He would arrive home from work to find her passed out on the couch, having neglected to feed and watch over the children. She was carrying on a generational curse. After so many episodes of that, he stopped giving her money and controlled the household finances with an iron fist. When he did give her money for domestic necessities, he insisted upon a receipt for her purchases. Ireina's addiction to alcohol was as strong as a drug addict's hankering for cocaine, crack, or heroin. Now that her husband restricted her ability to get her fix, she turned to crime. Many junkies, out of desperation, turn to prostitution or theft to feed their addictions. Ireina had something far more extreme in mind, something sinister. For a few years, the elderly women who lived in the township of Krasnoyarsk were no longer safe. Ireina was a skilled and cautious predator, tracking her victims for days so that she could get some sense of how they lived and how she could predict their movements. Most importantly, she needed to know if they had regular visitors. Isolation is the most important element of violent crime, after all, or at least it is if you don't want witnesses. Having taken all that into account, She would wait one day when the woman left her home. Ireina would attach a handwritten note on her door bearing the message, "At 11 o'clock, a social worker will call." When she reported to the woman's home at the appointed time, there was little resistance when she appealed to be let in. Once she was admitted and the door was closed, she would bludgeon the woman to death with an axe or hammer. Once the victim was sprawled out on the floor post-mortem, Ireina would raid her apartment in search of money. She preferred cash since valuables were more likely to be reported and their origins can often be traced. She frequently set fire to the residence, though they typically burned themselves out before they could do any significant damage. She didn't usually come into any windfalls through these robberies. The victims were pensioners living on tightly budgeted fixed incomes. So Ireina was lucky if she could get a hold of 20 rubles. Ireina had luck on her side for the time being. She was a blonde, and though many people reported to police that they recalled seeing a blonde woman at the victim's domicile, the police found it difficult to believe that such a person could be responsible for such grisly murders. They even considered the possibility that it was a man dressed like a woman. It was only when one surviving victim described the perpetrator as a woman when the police took this data seriously. Over 3,000 potential witnesses and a woman arrested under false pretenses further complicated the investigation. Ireina managed to avoid prosecution for 8 years, and taking this into account, complacency set in. She started to get sloppy in her planning and execution. Almost on impulse, she decided to kill 81-year-old Alexandra Povryatsina. Instead of going with the social worker routine, she offered to do some painting for the woman. Alexandra was found dead in May 2010, having been bludgeoned to death. Her neighbors reported to police that Ireina was seen entering and exiting Alexandra's apartment. Ireina was taken into custody. After hours of questioning, Ireina admitted that she killed her victims so she could steal money from them to spend on vodka. Investigators were skeptical, believing her to be a garden-variety serial killer. She was indicted on 346 charges, including 17 for murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her crimes, an outcome that was highly controversial among the Russian public. The judge explained his decision thusly: "The maximum jail term for women in Russia is 25 years. I have given the accused 5 years less because she is the mother of 2 small children." Part 5. Vladimir the Beast of Lisva, Bratislav. Women were being slaughtered in the township of Lisva. Within its population of 50,000, someone was so inhuman and depraved that they struck fear into the denizens of the town. From March 1997 to June 1998, somebody was flooding the streets with the blood of innocent women. He killed 30 women. When he was arrested and the citizens of Lisva got a glimpse of what he looked like, they were shocked. He was not some imposing figure with a profile of a giant with a barrel-like profile. He was a son of a successful local businessman who grew up in privilege. Ironically, his father put up the cash reward for anybody who could come forward with the information that would lead to the killer's arrest. It is unclear why Vladimir murdered all those women. He was evaluated by a psychiatrist and found to be sane. Vladimir reported that he was intimate with a mature woman when he was 14 years old, but could not perform due to erectile dysfunction. Whether that was a recurring infliction or not, the woman mocked and laughed at him. He never forgot that experience and became circumspect with females. He did not have a girlfriend in his teens, and the trend continued into his early adulthood. He told his friends that he preferred to play the field and spent a lot of time hanging out at the local nightclub. Even in that atmosphere, he didn't approach women. If a friend pointed out an attractive girl and suggested he approach her, he would dismiss her as a whore. The truth was that Vladimir very much wanted to have a relationship with a woman, but that encounter in his teens still haunted him. Reflecting on the experience left him impotent and frustrated. He began to deal with those feelings by stalking women. He would follow them from the nightclub all the way to their homes, often peeping through their windows. This did little to put a cap on his burgeoning misogynistic rage, and in March 1997, he could no longer contain it. One Friday night, he was following a woman home when she became aware of his presence and turned around, whereby she confronted him. She demanded to know why he was following her. One thing's for sure, she was making a lot of noise. To resolve that problem, he grabbed her by the throat and choked the sound out of her. He raped her and strangled her to death. He left her in a public park where her remains were found the following day. Contrary to the paradigm of serial killer pathology, he experienced considerable remorse over what he had done. He was so troubled by his actions, he went to a priest to confess. The priest did not believe him, leaving Vladimir even more frustrated. When his homicidal instincts resurfaced at a later date, he justified his plans to commit another murder by telling himself that if a clergyman was unwilling to listen to his story, there was no hope for him anyway. The next murder occurred in the morning. As she was jogging, he jumped out from some bushes and brought her into the brush. He raped her and finished her off by beating her savagely and strangling her to death. He also indulged in cannibalism, tearing chunks of flesh from her breasts before and after her death. About a week later, Vladimir murdered another woman. This time, the horrors inflicted on the victim included having her eyes gouged out, the idea being that it would be the last thing the eyes saw before being plucked. It is a superstition among many people in Eastern Europe. July 28, 1997. While out searching for a victim, Vladimir discovered Ireina Gadamashuk. He dragged her from a path in the public park, whereupon he raped her, beat her, and gouged out her eyes, all while she was still alive. Incredibly, Ireina survived, though she was unable to provide any useful information about her attacker to the police. August 4th, Vladimir stalked Olga Kosenko from the nightclub. Her remains were discovered in the morning. She was raped, strangled, and mutilated. August 17th. 18-year-old Anna Marakulina. Before he could kill her, he realized that he knew her. He tried to extricate himself from prosecution by claiming he only struck her to scare her, like it was a prank. She was not convinced and threatened to contact the police. To prevent himself not only from being charged for that assault, but from being linked to all the murders, he beat her about the head, raped her, and beat her to death. August 22nd. 17-year-old Maria Shitsova was also known to Vladimir. They were standing outside the nightclub when he persuaded her to go on a walk with him. He took her to the park, where he beat and strangled her into submitting to his will. He then raped her and bit down on her breasts. He pushed a chunk of wood down her throat. August 29th. Elvira Konzeparova was raped and strangled by Vladimir. Her eyes were plucked out of their sockets. More such victims were found, most in the park, yet the police investigation failed to narrow down on a suspect. Not only did his father put up reward money, but his brother was part of a government law enforcement agency that got involved in the investigation. June 10th, 1998. Natalia Mizantseva was assaulted in the park by a man who grabbed her purse afterwards and fled the scene. She recognized Vladimir and reported him to the militia that had been investigating the murders. They dismissed this finding, feeling that a child of a wealthy family would not resort to purse snatching. Days later, he subjected a woman to a savage beating in the park, though for whatever reason, he allowed her to live. She went straight to the police. She accompanied them to the park, where they encountered Vladimir lurking in the bushes. During the interrogation, Vladimir admitted to the killings, though he denied that his motives were sexual in nature. He said he only wished to rob them, and he only killed the women who saw his face. Of course, this didn't explain the rape and mutilation. He was sentenced to life in prison. Part 6. Anatoly Slivko. Not every serial killer starts out with sinister pastimes, like arson or animal cruelty. In fact, Anatoly Slivko grew up in a normal household and, at least in his early adulthood, his life was largely unremarkable. In 1961, he was documented as a married man and a father of 2 children residing in the city of Novinomysk in Stavropol Krai. It was about that time when a critically pivotal event transpired in the life of Anatoly Slivko. He got into an automobile accident, and it was serious enough that the aftermath found him lucky to be alive. A boy in another car was killed. His body was torn asunder to the point that the crowd that assembled had to look away. It was so horrific. Anatoly did not experience the scene the same way they did. In fact, he couldn't stop staring at it and even became sexually aroused. Whether this experience pulled the cap off a source of hidden pathology or his brain was damaged, leaving him with a lust for blood and gore, remains unknown. What is known is that an obsession rose up within him and demanded eruption after over 23 years of dormancy. Having resumed his normal life, he felt ashamed and disgusted by his reaction to the remains of the dead boy. This did nothing to quell his obsession with mangled bodies. However, he still experienced sexual arousal as he recalled the sight of the dead boy. This led to masturbation as he visualized the scene in his mind. It got to the point where he was unable to achieve an erection without summoning up those images in his imagination. The more he tried to suppress these memories and feelings, the more obsessed he became with acting on them. 1963. His first victim was a homeless 15-year-old boy. He told the boy that he was making a documentary about the horrors committed by the Nazis in Russia during World War II. He told him he would feed him and give him a few rubles if he agreed to be in the film. He told him he wanted to shoot a scene of a young boy being hanged. He said there was a possibility that the boy might pass out from time to time during shooting, but he would revive him. The boy found this impossible to pass up. According to Anatoly's confession, he only intended to render the boy unconscious, but he hung for so long he could not be revived. He didn't stop recording the hanging on video and taking snapshots. Later, Anatoly was tormented by remorse and afraid of being discovered with the corpse, so he dismembered the boy's body parts and buried them. He also decided to destroy the video footage and photos. The feelings of guilt were short-lived, and he would soon prey on another victim. He was in a better position to lure young men to his lair, for he was the chairman of the local Churgid Youth Club and an amateur filmmaker of note. Sure enough, 15-year-old Alexander Nesmeanov became his next victim. As with his previous victim, he gave him the pitch of shooting footage for a reenactment of World War II-era tortures involving hanging. He tied the boy up and documented him slowly but surely choking to death. Once the boy was dead, he cut him down, contorted his body in varied positions, and photographed him. He masturbated and caressed the boy's remains as he did so. He also took a photo of his shoes and retained them as keepsakes. He finished up by dismembering his body, dousing it in gasoline, and burying it. May 11th, 1975. 11-year-old Andrei Pogosyan was a member of Churgid. One day after a meeting, he failed to return home, and his mother was beside herself with worry. She reported him missing to the police, noting that Andrei accompanied a man into the forest to shoot a movie. The police actually knew she was talking about Anatoly Slivko, but because of his sterling reputation in the community, they did not question him. Throughout the years, 43 boys accompanied Slivko as they advanced upon the forest for his film shoots. All of them but 3 sustained nothing but bruises and friction burn from rope on their necks. He figured out how long he could dangle a boy before it resulted in death. The rest were dismembered, doused with gasoline, and burned. November 1985. Tamara Lang was the new prosecutor in town. On her first day of work in that position, she was visited by a distraught mother named Slava Kovistik. She felt the police did not investigate the disappearance of her son in 1982 in a way she would consider adequate. Lang agreed to investigate the case herself. She interviewed many members of Churgid. Many said they had gone with Anatoly into the woods to shoot films and that afterwards they experienced, quote, temporary amnesia. Despite opposition from her colleagues, she issued an arrest warrant for Anatoly Slivko. To the surprise of investigators, he confessed to not only the murder of the son of the grieving mother, but to 6 others. He led police to the 6 burial areas, though he struggled to remember where he buried the first victim. September 1986, Anatoly Slivko was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. He was executed via gunshot to the head. Part 7. Mikhail the Wednesday Murderer Popkov. Mikhail Popkov was born in March 1964. As a child, he was abused by his mother, who was an alcoholic. Despite this, he emerged as a happy, well-adjusted child with no signs of oppositional defiant disorder when engaging with adults. He was generally well-behaved and stayed out of trouble. As he became an adult, he decided upon a career in law enforcement. He lived out that dream as an officer for the Angarsk police force in rural Siberia. He married a colleague on the force and had a child. Popkov was remembered for his ability to deal with hysterical criminals in a way that de-escalated the situation. He rarely had to draw his gun. When he did shoot a criminal, it was a suspected rapist, and he did not suffer any penalties. Between 1992 and 2000, a murderer was targeting women in Angarsk. They preferred female victims who were diminutive and full-figured. He targeted them as they left bars and taverns. Most of his victims were found on a Wednesday, hence the handle, the Wednesday Killer. He was also dubbed the Werewolf because of the disfiguring injuries he visited upon his victims. Approximately 24 women were killed by him. The typical protocol is they were taken to the forest, whereupon they were ordered to disrobe. They would then be attacked with one of several weapons, such as an axe, an awl, a screwdriver, a slipknot, or some kind of knife. The killer did not extend to them the mercy of a quick death. Many of the victims were decapitated. One woman's heart was ripped out. Others had deep holes cut into their abdomens and had their entrails yanked out. Having torn the body asunder and rendering it a bloody pulp, he would have necrophiliac sex with it. After he climaxed, he departed from the scene. The local police force was not prepared for the complexities of this investigation. They attempted to bring in federal Russian authorities, but they offered no assistance. January 26, 1998. A 15-year-old girl named Svetlana was discovered wandering around in the nude. The winter temperatures were peak frigid, but she did not register that reality because she was in a daze. She had hypothermia and critical head trauma. She was taken to a hospital and was able to tell her story to detectives after she recovered. She said she was walking alone along a road when a man in a police car pulled up alongside her. He told her it was too dark out for her to walk alone. Deciding that a police officer would be unlikely to cause her any harm, she got into the car. Instead of driving her home, he drove her out to the country at a high rate of speed. Having arrived, he forced her to remove her clothes at gunpoint. Once she was naked, he grabbed her by the hair and bashed her head against a tree. She managed to run away and, lucky for her, he did not shoot or try to catch up on foot. She staggered to a town called Baikalsk. Though the officers were skeptical that one amongst their ranks would be responsible for the attack, they showed her photos of all the officers on the force. She identified Mikhail Popkov as the perpetrator. However, this did not lead to an arrest or conviction, and the murders continued. The police decided to take Svetlana's allegations seriously years later. By this point, they were utilizing DNA as a forensics tool. Mikhail Popkov had quit the force by then and was working as a security guard. But his semen sample was subpoenaed. Sperm was found in the victims' bodies, and his was proven to be a match. He was arrested on June 23, 2012. He confessed to the murders while giving no motive. He only said that he felt compelled to kill. One detail of note is that all of the victims cut a similar physical profile to his mother. When he was asked why he stopped killing, he said he contracted syphilis from one of his victims and developed erectile dysfunction as a result and lost his sex drive. He said that as he lost his desire for sexual congress, he lost his bloodlust. His case went to trial in January 2015. He was found guilty of murdering 22 women and attempting to kill 2 others. He was sentenced to life in prison. Part 8. The Nighttime Killers. Vladimir Kondratybenko and Vladislav Volkovich. June 18, 1996. Police were dispatched to the Karavavy-Dachi train station. At first glance, it appeared that a murder committed there was the result of an armed robbery gone awry. The victim in question was 44-year-old factory worker Evgeny Eshkin. He had just gotten paid and was heading home when he was attacked. Speculation had it that he fought back, for the response from the assailant was a .22 bullet to the head. This struck the investigators as being a more simplified answer that offered little in the way of background. Also, he wasn't just shot. He was stabbed many times in the chest. This led to a theory that there may have been an accomplice. Robbery was ruled out as a motivation because Evgeny still had his money in his pocket. When inquiring into Evgeny's life, detectives were notified that he was well liked by his colleagues and had no known adversaries. Investigators began examining crimes that were committed in and around that train station and soon discovered a paradigm. Months earlier, a homeless man was shot and killed in the immediate vicinity. The bullet was a .22. It was too damaged for a ballistics exam, however. Having realized there might be a serial killer on the loose, the police conducted a surveillance operation at the station. This approach did not yield the results they hoped for. July 2nd, a doctor named Alexander Agorov was sitting in his car when a man armed with a gun walked up and shot 2 bullets through the window, killing Margarod on impact. Just as police were responding to that murder, word came in about another homicide. A man was shot and stabbed to death just a few blocks away from where Dr. Margarod was killed. There were witnesses to both murders. They described the killer as being of medium height and build and approximately 30 years of age. The descriptions were not immediately useful, but the police found clues at the crime scenes, like fingerprints and ballistics that matched the bullets fired at Evgeny Iskun. July 16th, Alexander Shpok was at a party accompanied by his girlfriend when he got into a fight with 2 men who entered the party unbidden. The men left without incident and the festivities resumed. Shpok's girlfriend left before him, and he left on his own. After his departure later that night, he was never seen by his closest associates again. The next morning, he was found dead, having been shot and stabbed. His girlfriend provided a description to the police of the men Shpok argued with. She recalled that one of them addressed the other as Vladimir. Though that clue did not bring investigators close to an arrest, it was a step in the right direction. September 4th, another man was killed. September 28th, 10:30 p.m., 36-year-old Peter Gromov had been shot to death. His body was left decomposing in a gutter. His vehicle was found about a block away. The ballistics linked this killing to the other murders. At this point, the police were convinced they were dealing with a serial killing duo. Witnesses indicated that they saw 2 men carrying out the attacks. Police began questioning local residents to see if they might have any useful information about the suspects. One woman said she recognized one of them. His name was Vladimir, and he lived in an apartment in the neighborhood. Police officers converged on the building in question and launched a search. They didn't find the suspect, but they did find another murder victim. Alexander Bykov was found slumped over in a chair, a bullet in his head. They ran ballistics on the bullet, and it matched those found in the other victims. While searching the apartment, they found a photo of a young man who resembled the primary suspect. The superintendent said he didn't know him and that he didn't live in the building. With no other leads at the moment, the police placed the apartment under surveillance. 3 days later, the police saw a man who resembled the suspect. He was a shifty sort, stopping constantly as he made his way down the street, looking back and forth like a shoplifter keeping an eye out for loss prevention staff. Suddenly he was alarmed by something he saw and fled into a market nearby, where he disappeared. A new lead emerged, and it was more promising than all the others. Alexander Bykov had been married, but he was estranged from his wife. Due to the fact that she was next of kin, she was required by law to go to the morgue and identify the body. She was accompanied by a man. That man was overheard saying that he would do whatever he could to find Alexander's executioner. That man also provided his details to an officer. His name? Vladimir Dmitrievich Kondratenko. His best friend, Vladislav Volkovich, along with Kondratenko, both resembled men who were seen committing the murders by witnesses. Arrest warrants were issued. They weren't issued quickly enough to save the life of their newest victim, an unidentified woman they assaulted and killed inadvertently while fleeing a crime scene. Volkovich and Kondratyenko were taken into custody and confessed to committing 20 murders, as well as robberies, carjackings, and burglaries. When asked about a motive, they said that one idea for how to make money was to become contract killers. They weren't sure at first if they could do it, so they took a few practice runs, killing easy targets within the vulnerable sector, like the homeless. They soon discovered they enjoyed murder and continued killing. One technique was to hitchhike and ask the driver to stop by a friend's house to pick up a box, whereupon the driver would be killed. May 1997. The men were charged with 16 murders. Kondratyenko committed suicide by overdosing on pharmaceuticals to avoid his punishment. Vladislav Volkovich tried to weasel his way out of facing the music by blaming his deceased partner, but that defense did not hold up. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Thanks for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.